Good afternoon. This is the Weather Guru. Good evening, rather. This is the Weather Guru bringing you the 8 p.m. update with Tropical Storm Laura. Tropical Storm Laura is still over western Cuba and is about to getting ready to emerge over into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. And as of the 8 p.m. advisory, current maximum sustained winds have risen by 5 miles per hour to 65 miles per hour, and the pressure has dropped 2 millibars to 998 millibars. The movement is slow just a little bit, but it's still moving quite fast, west-northwest at 20 miles per hour. The Air Force and Hurricane Hunters, we went in there and we found a little bit of stronger winds on the southeast side of the system, and that was enough to bump it up 5 miles per hour. Now, the next advisory comes out at 11 p.m., and I do expect it to hold strength or to gain maybe a little bit more strength, maybe up to 70 miles an hour, or possibly a minimal hurricane by morning. It's in a favorable environment coming off the tip of Cuba and the Gulf of Mexico because there's a low wind shear down there, and that is expected to at least continue for the next 24 to 48 hours into Tuesday afternoon. And so, of course, it should be strengthening. It had a little bit better satellite presentation here. I can show you the satellite presentation. It had a better presentation in terms of the inflow and outflow of the system here. And that has allowed it to strengthen somewhat tonight, 65 miles an hour. And the northeast wind shear has relaxed a little bit as it's pulling away from that wind shear that was here. It's starting to pull away from that area and move to the northwest. And so as it emerges out here into the Gulf of Mexico, this should be prime strengthening time for Tropical Storm Laura, which should become a Hurricane Laura by tomorrow. Now, some couple of features here that I want to note with this system. The first one is that most of the heavy convection is on the south and east side of the system, away from the center. The center did form some tight convective bands, but most of the tight banding, as you can see here, once again, is on the south and east side of the system, away from the exposed center here, which is heading into the Gulf of Mexico. That won't prohibit strengthening of this system in the short term, but it's something to think about in the long term. Now, as we go to our maps here, I want to show you the current setup here. This is by the Weather Channel, provided by the Weather Channel. You see we have a high pressure dominance over here. But on top of that high pressure, we have a trough that's digging in like so. And on top of that, these are the two steering currents above the system. So this is where Laura is coming up down here. So Laura has the option of coming in like so and meeting that thing, but if it meets the trough, that means that it's going to be sheared off the top. We saw that with Marco. So most of the precipitation and heavy winds will be on the east side, like so, or it has the chance to come up and make a northerly turn sooner than expected if the high pressure over here is, the high pressure retreats, comes back this way, comes back east and retreats, then Laura will turn northwestward much sooner than what's in the forecast cone right now. So that's the first thing I want to show you to watch out for later Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. Next up, I want to show you the actual shear that's going on right now. This is what the forecasters are talking about. The areas of dark orange indicate heavy wind shear. That's winds flowing in opposite directions, which tend to knock down the tall thunderstorms that are needed to sustain a major hurricane or a hurricane in general. We saw that with Marco. There is Marco right there. Marco made landfall today, and you've seen that. Now here's Laura. Laura's coming up now. Okay, now watch what happens when we go to the current shear. This is the current wind shear map. Okay, the areas of green are favorable areas in the Gulf of Mexico where it's favorable for development, where there's no wind shear. The area of these red lines mean that there's unfavorable, there's heavy wind shear up to 50 knots, 40 knots, per hour. Okay, this is Marco here. You see how it's against that shear? That's what happened today. It ran to the shear. Now here's Laura down here. Laura's down here in this here. So Laura's moving. Let me highlight it for you. Okay, Laura's right here on the western tip of Cuba. It's coming off tonight, and it's emerging in a favorable area. So far, no problems. In warm water, the temperature in the Gulf is 88 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's perfect. Everything, check that box off. Low wind shear, check that box off. And it's starting to get better organized. So in the short term, the next 12 hours, Laura should be strengthening into a hurricane. So the next advisory at 11 p.m., I expect it to be at 70 miles an hour or 75 mile per hour minimum hurricane coming out into the Gulf of Mexico. But as we get into let me clear this off. As we get into as we get into Wednesday, excuse me, because let me show you the track here, at least the current track right now. Here, I'm going to go back to the track. Okay, the cone, forecast cone. Okay, as we get into Wednesday, it's a hurricane, right? But here is the big question. Okay, does it continue northwestward? Does it slow down? Or does it make that turn before that trough? Because it's going to come up against that trough. So either the high pressure erodes sooner than expected and Laura makes that turn northward much sooner than this cone, or it continues on its path, as the computer models say, and it runs into that trough and it gets sheared apart. It may become 110-mile-an-hour storm, because it's in the area where it's favorable for that, right? I just showed you just the favorable. So it may get up to, let's say it gets up to 115, 110 miles an hour, a major hurricane. But when it runs into this shear, that's it. Because see, this wind shear has been here persistent for the last 4 to 5 days. Moderate wind shear turning into strong wind shear, as you can see. So the 24-hour forecast, it looks good. Everything's in the blue. Not much wind shear in the Gulf of Mexico. As you can see, there's a sweet spot. It's coming out into this sweet spot. But as we head through time, you will notice the 48-hour forecast. Look at that. More wind shear coming in. This belt of wind shear is here. Can also come down. And then we go to the 72-hour forecast, and there's more wind chill, 50 knots coming across from the southwest. But this time, the system will be long gone past this area. But the main thing to keep in mind is that as the system approaches, this trough is pretty much here to stay. And this current wind shear will relax here. It provides a sweet spot, yes. But eventually, it's going to be overtaken by this southwesterly wind shear coming across the Gulf like that, and it's basically going to rip the storm apart. So right now we have all the convection on the south and east side. Well, we have this southwesterly shear coming across the system. Eventually, it's going to knock the convection down. Let me go to the other map here so I can show you what I'm talking about. It'll knock the convection down here to it'll knock this convection down to the east and to the northeast and east. All of this convection here once it gets closer to landfall, and at the same time the system will be weakening. So it'll briefly make a major hurricane, 110, 105 miles per hour, as the cone shows, and then it will start to weaken due to wind shear rapidly to a Category 1 or possibly a strong tropical storm. It won't weaken as fast as Marco because Marco was a smaller system. Hurricane force winds only extend out 10 miles from Marco, and then it died. It became a tropical storm, and it just died out. But Laura will be a hurricane, and a pretty healthy hurricane with winds could reaching around 95 or 100 miles an hour. And then you're talking about you still have a day or two. You still have a day left before landfall, if it does make landfall right here at Lake Charles, or so they say. So that is what the conditions are right now. And right now, if you look at the map, you can even see the tropical storm force winds, all 175 miles of it are all to the right, displaced to the right of the system, just like Marco. So we've seen that song and dance before. But Laura does look a little better organized. It's still not completely symmetrical. And another thing is with Laura is that it has more time. It has more time to develop, but at the same time, you can have 100-degree water, but if the system internally is not developed strong, the inflow and the outflow, it's not going to matter how warm the water is, because it's just not going to strengthen. Remember, they thought the same thing about Marco. They said, oh, Marco's in a warm environment. Everything is favorable. And what happened? Wind shear. Wind shear is the killer of hurricanes, especially if it's a small hurricane. Now, this one is a little bit bigger. It's it's got some help to it. But that does not mean that the internal elements are still the same. It's basic thermodynamics. Okay? So just because the storm is bigger and, it's coming across fast like this one, and it seems to have a lot of convective banding. It's not completely, you notice the bands don't completely encircle the center here. You notice that, right? You see dry air coming in now already. So if it's not the dry air that's coming down from Marco that's going to damage the storm, it's going to be the wind shear that's going to damage the storm. And by the way, you can see let me just show you on this radar. You see Marco up here? See the exposed center right there? Okay, this is what Laura is coming into. Marco will be long gone, but Laura is coming into that environment, and that's why it's going to strengthen in the short term. Yes, in the 12-hour period, it's going to, strengthen. I don't expect rapid intensification, but don't be surprised if you look up and and Laura is a 100-mile-an-hour hurricane, a 105-mile-an-hour hurricane, a 110. That's fine. But eventually it's going to run into this southwesterly shear, which I'm going to show you. On top of that, it's going to run into cooler temperatures water because it's upwelling of the water. That means that when a system has moved over cooler water, even though the water temperature is 88, Marco's already stirred up that water. So that's going to drop the available heat content of the water for Laura to come through. So that's the latest update. The next update is at 11 p.m. And at that time, I expect Laura to be around a 70 mile an hour or 75 mile an hour minimal hurricane. If they don't name it tonight, make it a hurricane, they'll make it a hurricane in the morning at 8 a.m. around, at 75 miles an hour, as it will have already emerged off the coast of Cuba. So I want you to keep that in mind. Now, as far as the track, this track, forecast cone track right now is okay for now, but if we get to Tuesday morning and I see that it's slowed down tremendously, then that means that's a big sign. If you see right now it's moving west northwest at 20 miles an hour. If it slows down to west northwest at 10 or 5 miles an hour, then that means it's already feeling the effects of a high pressure system that I told you about that's out here that is eroding. Okay, so if the high pressure system is retreating back to the east, then that allows Marco to make that turn a little bit sooner than what this forecast cone showed. And that is entirely possible, even though people say this is a strong high pressure. I know, but it's possible that can weaken and erode or retreat it east to allow Marco to turn late Tuesday into Wednesday morning. So be on the lookout for that. That's also a deep possibility here that I would not be surprised if that happened. To Tropical Storm Laura. So that's the 8 a.m. update. Thank you very much for joining me. This is the Weather Guru. Be sure to subscribe to keep the latest updates, and we'll be sure to keep you on top of the storm in all angles as best we can. Thank you very much. Have a great night.